I feel pretty certain there are very few churches this morning who had gorgeous handbell music and Pink Floyd. We kind of love Pink Floyd at our house, not because we've ever been to any of those concerts, but because years ago when a friend persuaded me to do her wedding, the drummer from Pink Floyd was there. He was a friend of the groom's. And so this wedding was in this beautiful countryside. And when it came time for the drummer and his friends to leave, they couldn't get a cab that would come out there. So I went to my husband and I said, honey, you're going to have to take them to the airport. He said, oh no, I'm not taking them to the airport. And I said, no, really, they're never going to get there if you don't take them. Finally, I convinced him to do it. He was gone forever because it's like 50 miles to the airport and back. And when he finally came back, he was so irritated. And I said, how bad was it? He said, well, let's just say it was weird as all get out. And I said, okay, that makes sense. And he said, but he did give me a $50 tip. And I said, you gave it back to him, didn't you? And he said, heck no, I didn't. So thank you for Pink Floyd this morning and that lovely, fun memory. Well, beginning today, as Michael told you, we enter the liturgical season of Eastertide. And as we begin, I feel a duty to confess that it is my goal to turn all of you into fabulous scholars and theologians by the first Sunday in June. In order to accomplish this, we are devoting this entire season to searching for a path that will help us discover the theological depths that surround and support the possibility of a life that can come from death. This will be a series and a search that will challenge us to look at embedded beliefs as we take apart and examine what we have been taught and what we were told to believe. It is a series that will require a lot of deep breaths, and it will require us to open ourselves to all that the divine will weave in and through our personal and our communal life. And interestingly, this path is one that begins with an ending. So we begin this Sunday, surrounded by the beautiful memories of a wonderful Palm Sunday, a sweet Holy Thursday, a reflective Good Friday, all of which were followed by such a joyous Easter. It would seem the smart thing to do, if we thought about it, to keep riding on that high. Because we are living in a time and place that is taking a lot out of us every single day. This does beg the question, why would we spend time searching for a yet to be discovered path? The answer is rather simple, because beginning with the days of COVID, we have asked you again and again to expand your minds and your hearts and your bodies in order to find new ways of being. And we have seen time and time again the reward that comes as we deepen our faith and our sense of belonging in this amazing place. So we do begin again, and we set out on this path, surrounded by all that is good and holy among us, around us, and within us. This is a path that will allow us to breathe as we walk toward a way of being that will help us and those we meet to find life in all its abundance. We have said many times over the last few months, the era we are living in now is unparalleled in our generations. We have studied the past times that were perilous. We have heard the stories of the hardships of our ancestors. We have seen the horrendous photographs that tell the stories without words. And scholars will argue which of those time periods were the best or the hardest, the most productive or the most disastrous. And while the truths of the past have much to teach us, in the midst of this current crisis, it is imperative that we work together to dream a new future. The followers of Jesus had experienced the death of the one they followed and loved, and they were devastated. I thought of the gospel accounts of these followers as I watched the people this last week come to Vatican Square and mourn the one they followed in this century. Like Jesus, Pope Francis went to those who were hurting. He went to those who needed him most, the powerless, the hungry, those who had been told they were worthless, and those who had no home and no rights. During his time as Pope, he tried to change a system that for centuries had been heading in what he believed was the wrong direction. He fully knew there were two different paths for the church he loved, and he chose the lower road. Pope Francis did not choose the path where the mighty and the powerful showed off their brilliance and wealth as together they invented a future for only those they found worthy. In our time, almost like any given time in history, we can find that two distinct pathways emerge. As this is happening, it would be quite easy to say, well, these are simply the pathway, one of good and one of evil. And how I wish it were that easy. Because then in all of our wisdom, we could know who to hate and who to love. We could know who to help, who to leave behind. We could know for certain that our pathway, of course, was at the head of the line because we are so very righteous, right? Jesus had a different pathway in mind, and it is one that has been honored and sadly distorted through millennia. Here in this community at this time, we come from many different paths. We come from many different faiths and understandings of particular faiths. And we all struggle in one way or another to find the emerging path we can call our own. In the Christian faith, there are two basic stories about Jesus. Roger Woolsey, who has written on this for over 25 years, simplifies it even further by saying there is a conservative story about Jesus and a liberal story about Jesus. It's much more complicated than that, but I do agree there are two stories that begin very differently. The story of Jesus that begins with original sin as the premises of the grand narrative of the Bible is the one that leads us, I believe, to concentrate on the death of Jesus. Original sin, our friend J. Philip Newell says, teaches what is deepest in us is opposed to God rather than of God. Through the ages, this story has been used to condemn us for being sinful, and it has for so many been a catalyst for immense amounts of guilt and pain. The origins of this concept of original sin can be traced to the 4th century and to the teachings of Augustine. Some would say this concept came from Augustine's ties to a pagan culture, a Gnostic world, and a Roman government that had suddenly become Christian. Whatever the reason, the result was that in the 4th century, the same Roman government that executed Jesus conveniently used the doctrine of original sin to subdue the people who were now the followers of the Jesus they had killed. And I swear, it never sounded this complicated in Sunday school to me. In the beginning, this story actually helped the Roman government as they continued to build their empire. They could keep working on conquering the world and subdue people, and they were able to do it under the guise of a divine calling. The result was that their newfound Christianity became a religion of an empire that controlled their subjects. From this perceived sinful origin, and with a well-orchestrated religion of dependency that relied on people's submission, in this story, in essence, Jesus was left on the cross, and his death became the central focus of that faith. But there is an additional story, a story that begins with original blessing, and in this story, rather than seeing humanity as sinful or fallen, this understanding presumes that we are inherently good, that we carry the image of the divine within us, and we find our life in being an extension of the divine. This story also reaches back in history, again to the 4th century, and a Celtic priest named Pelagius, one of my favorite people in any generation and century. He opposed the doctrine of original sin. Pelagius opposed the doctrine and fought against it because he believed it would distance Christ from what was at the core of our being. The second story believes that Christ came to restore us to our depths and remind us of our true identity as divine creation, which is straight out of the Genesis story, a story that did not condemn us. It would seem to many that this view of original blessing died with Pelagius when he was killed for his beliefs. Fortunately, it was kept alive by the Celts, whose faith led them to be closer to nature, to the origins of our being on this earth. It led them to believe in a God, in a Christ, in a Jesus, who came to remind us of who we truly are. And it was a story they handed down to us. And much in our life depends on the stories we believe, consciously or unconsciously. I don't know about you, but at this point in my life, I certainly prefer a living Jesus. Because this living Jesus gives us a way to boldly and courageously, no matter what anyone else says, live our lives. This living Jesus gives us confidence and assurance and a strength that helps us draw from his story and from each other in ways that empower us to face the challenges that each day brings. This living Jesus reminds us to follow the way of his life by being radically engaged with the injustice of the powers that be, the powers that still in so many places want to subdue and create people who are dependent on their form of religion for salvation. The good news of this day and of every day is that we are made in the image of God, and that image is very good. The good news of this day and every day is that we carry the original blessing of God, and that our faith is not contingent upon what we have or how much we make, but by the ability and the strength of our hearts. The ability and strength that gives us the responsibility to stand with those who are oppressed, not simply to give them charity, but to respect them as equal partners around the table, as together we find the path of justice and goodness in the here and now. On this first Sunday of Eastertide, as we prepare to come and share the table today, can you see the path unfolding in this, our time and place? May we build this path together, both right now and in the days to come. Amen.